Snow White bombs, breaks records for the lowest live-action remake opening ever. Let me say that again. Ever.
Snow White is officially Disney's biggest box office disaster of all time. And with the second weekend rolling in now as we speak, the train wreck is only getting worse and worse for Disney.
It had the lowest opening, under 50 million, of any of these live action Disney remakes that they've ever had.
She is having a hilarious meltdown on Instagram that we're going to be checking out today as well.
Picture this. It's a fine day in Hollywoodland, and Disney, once upon a time the paragon of family-friendly fairy tales, decides to toss $500 million into the magical wishing well for a live-action Snow White remake that, in the grand tradition of Tinseltown fiascos, ends up rewriting the definition of a flop.
This movie is going to be losing Disney hundreds of millions of dollars, and they deserve every bit of loss they get from this film.
Because, of course, in the year of our overblown controversies, we need a heroine who hates the original 1930s Sever love story, calls her suitor a stalker, and can't resist stuffing every microphone with even more head-scratching commentary.
Rachel is literally the star of a Disney movie, and she acts like she's some sort of victim, and that's the sort of mentality that is just poisoning people's minds. Like, she acts like her life is so bad.
I truly do believe that. There's something wrong with her. She's disturbed, she's unhappy, and she thinks it's about feminism and the patriarchy and about abortion. But the reality is she's just not stable, like the majority of people in Hollywood. They're just not stable human beings.
Enter Rachel Zegler, Disney's new leading lady who's convinced she's the Winged Victory of Samothrace incarnate. Roll out the red carpet for her unstoppable torrent of cringe. This talented yet tragically PR-challenged starlet decided the best way to promote a beloved classic was by deriding everything that made it beloved in the first place.
I know this point has been made, but this truly is the worst casting maybe in the history of the film industry.
Disney is having its own problems. They're finally releasing the latest adaptation of Snow White, but they're scaling back the Hollywood premiere of the film. Kinsey, why is that?
Because Rachel Zegler is a PR nightmare.
Which might explain how half of the planet now sees Snow White as a cautionary tale about missing dwarves, missing humility, and missing the point altogether. If you haven't already heard, the initial trailer revealed a legion of so-called magical creatures who looked more like a rowdy frat house after too many energy drinks than a band of dwarves.
Isn't this the one where they actually took the dwarves out of the Seven Dwarfs?
Yes,
Yep.
we have CGI dwarves now.
Okay, yeah, because little people didn't need jobs either.
The latest victim of really bad ideas is finally here. The magical Disney DEI woke equity version of the 1937 classic Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. But because the word dwarves is now apparently controversial, Disney took that part out of the movie altogether. And now the movie is just called Snow White, which would be like Disney taking lions out of Lion King or mermaids out of The Little Mermaid.
Naturally, Disney insisted it was all in the name of diversity, because nothing says inclusive paradise like firing actual little person actors and digitally inserting a kaleidoscope of random tall bandits in post-production. The real dwarves, furious they were scrapped, began ranting about how Disney robbed them of a chance to actually appear in a project that is literally called Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, except apparently not anymore.
A few lessons for Disney. Number one, stop cannibalizing all your old IP. Like, it's really bad. It's really bad business. Number two, please stop changing all of the historic plots, which actually have meaning to generations of people, to instead become generic woke story about how woman leads revolutionary uprising and she don't need no man.
And, you know the saying, go woke, get broke, and Disney's going to lose money on this movie. And I believe it only made less than $1 million in China.
If Disney wants to make more woke films that tank at the box office, they are more than welcome to do that, but maybe think of an original idea.
Disney, despite losing over $1 billion on their last 4 movies, as they continue to shove woke politics into people's faces who just want to go to the movie, laugh, cry, and go home. Look, people don't want to be lectured when they're watching a movie, and they certainly don't want to be told that they're bad people. But that's what Disney continues to do.
You can't make this stuff up. They replaced the dwarves with an uncanny CGI cluster just to avoid a made-up controversy, which only created a bigger real controversy. And if that wasn't enough comedic gold, Disney spent a reported $270 million making this epic mistake, then tacked on another $230 million to market it, only to have Rachel Zegler basically say, in countless interviews, that the original story is weird, that the 1937 prince is a creeper, and that anybody expecting an actual love story should probably stay home.
You know, the original cartoon came out in 1937, and very evidently so. There's a big focus on her love story with a guy who literally stalks her.
Yeah.
Weird.
Super weird.
So we didn't do that
Super
this
weird.
time.
So no prince or a different kind of prince?
We have a different approach to what I'm sure a lot of people will assume is a love story just because, like, we cast a guy in the movie.
Right.
Andrew Burnap, great dude.
Yeah.
It's one of those things that I think everyone's going to have their assumptions about what it's actually going to be, but it's really not about the love story at all, which is really, really wonderful. And whether or not she finds love along the way is anybody's guess until 2024.
God.
All of Andrew's scenes could get cut. Who knows? It's Hollywood, baby.
While she's at it, she might as well have told the audience to burn their tickets and watch paint dry, because nothing drains hype faster than the star of the show telling you the core plot is nonsense.
1.9 out of 10 on IMDb, and those, by the way, they weren't dwarves, they were called bandits. So the Snow White doesn't, like, the amount of, like, if it ain't broken, don't fix it. Leave it the alone. Yeah, that's it. If it ain't broke, break it. Like, leave these stories alone. By the way, if she never opened her mouth and she didn't do all this nonsense, people would have gone and watched the movie. They would have made their money, but then people would have been disappointed after the math.
But wait, did you think Hollywood's self-inflicted injuries couldn't get any better? Enter Gal Gadot, the evil queen who evidently can't stand to be on the same stage as Zegler, according to rumor mill chatter about behind-the-scenes frostiness. They've sparingly appeared together, and the rare times they do, you can practically feel the cringe wafting off them.
So now, as the movie comes out, the two biggest stars in this movie can't stand each other to the point where they can't be in the same room, which forced Disney, in their infinite wisdom, to cut back on doing a formal premiere.
At one event, they introduced an award for best visual effects by reading the teleprompter so stiffly, it was like two coworkers forced to greet each other at the company potluck after an HR complaint. Now, we all know the original Snow White is considered a pioneer in animation.
More than 250,000 paintings like these were created by Walt Disney and his staff of artists to make the most daring adventure in the history of motion pictures, with new and amazing characters. Snow White, warm, human, the lovable Seven Dwarfs. But let Walt Disney tell you about them himself.
Dwarfs' names fit their personalities. This pompous-looking individual is Doc, the self-appointed leader of the group. And this little fellow is bashful. He's secretly in love with Snow White. And this funny face is Sneezy. He has hay fever. And old droopy eyes is called Sleepy. And Happy here with the beaming smile. And old Sourpuss here is Grumpy, the woman hater. And last but not least is Dopey. He's nice, but sort of silly.
But apparently that 1937 gem is too stale, regressive, or horrifying to keep around. Never mind that Disney built an empire off it. So the creative team decided to refresh it for modern audiences, which typically means burying the innocence and doubling down on lectures about empowerment. Except here, empowerment translates to Snow White doesn't need a prince. She doesn't need dwarves, and she definitely doesn't need any sense of wonder or romance.
And as we saw last weekend with the first weekend for Snow White, Rachel Zegler was coping real hard. She, of course, was saying things like on Instagram, like, thank you so much for making this the #1 movie in the world, guys. And, well, this time around with the second weekend, her approach is completely different, okay?
And now she's trying to reinvent herself because there's been so much blowback. And you can only imagine the studio calls about this woman behind the scene. Like, oh, my God, we're $242 million in, and our lead actress hates our film, our actors, our storyline.
The movie that nobody wanted to see, and I mean that seriously, nobody wants to see this movie. Ticket pre-sales are nowhere near what Disney was hoping for. Let's just say if you wanted to buy tickets for the 9 p.m. show tonight, wherever you are in America, you'd be just fine.
The result is a film so bleak and joyless that critics have dubbed it Snow White and 7 viewers, so we can all share a hearty laugh at the box office returns. In its opening weekend, the movie snagged a dismal $43 million, making it the worst-performing live-action remake in Disney's recent history. Yep, it even lost to 2019's Dumbo, a movie about a depressed elephant with big ears.
Snow White starring Rachel Zegler opened to a dismal $43 million, snagging the title of the lowest debut weekend for any Disney live-action remake, beating 2019's Dumbo at $46 million. They beat Dumbo. Shame on you, but it's for the worst ever.
At least Dumbo didn't cost $500 million to get in front of the public. Now, entertainment media tried spinning it as, oh, Snow White is 88 years old, so maybe audiences just aren't into vintage stories anymore, as though 2015's Cinderella, a 65-year-old tale at the time, didn't open to $68 million domestic and ultimately rake in $542 million worldwide. Of course, it's easier to blame the age of the property than the film as bizarre marketing strategy or the star's unending stream of negative commentary.
She told Variety that I'm only responsible for what I feel, and then I'm responsible for how I act upon it, which makes no sense at all.
The thing that really shocks me about this story, Disney and all these media companies, they invest hundreds of millions of dollars into these projects, right? Have they ever thought about maybe like a little bit of vulnerability study, opposition research, that sort of thing before you go and hire some Zoomer who's a lunatic?
Meanwhile, Disney's board has been busy patting themselves on the back for approving top-level compensation, even though the stock has more or less flatlined for 10 years. One can only imagine what goes on in shareholder meetings these days. Excuse me, Mr. Iger, but your strategy for returning value to Disney stockholders, did it involve lighting $500 million on fire to produce a deeply polarizing misadventure that nobody asked for? Because that's exactly how it looks from the outside.
Now, for Disney, as you probably remember, all of this publicity, the Zegler interviews, the Daily Mail leak, caused a lot of unexpected, for them anyway, pre-production problems. People weren't supposed to see and understand just how unwatchable the new Snow White was going to be. It was supposed to be, kind of a surprise, but now there was no hiding it.
But these guys at Disney, they're not that bright, they're not that smart, and we see that because they can't come up with any new IP.
Whether you're a fan of the older classics or just someone who appreciates a coherent brand strategy, it's impossible to ignore Disney's ongoing identity crisis. They're trying desperately to court mainstream audiences while simultaneously scolding them for enjoying timeless stories. After the Dwarves fiasco, the film's production was delayed, reshoots were ordered, budgets ballooned, and all the while, Rachel Zegler was out there on her microphone tour, dropping lines about how Snow White has a toxic relationship dynamic.
Her name is Rachel Zegler. Zegler, I don't know, Zegler. Okay, there's something wrong with this person. She's also known as the star of Snow White and the Disney movie. Remember, she was out like a couple years ago being like, there's certainly not going to be a prince rescuing me. I can tell you that. And then even Disney got on its heels and they're like, we're going to reshoot the movie immediately. Like we're going to make some changes because there was so much backlash to her arrogance and just inanity.
This is the same character who taught generations to whistle while they work, be kind to woodland creatures, and maybe sing a sweet tune or two. But apparently, we should all see her as a battered, powerless doormat whose prince was basically a 1930s predator. Gal Gadot, for her part, tried to keep a stiffer upper lip in interviews, praising the fresh spin on the story. But even she couldn't quite hide that forced grin whenever interviewers reminded her that the new Snow White, ironically, has the personality of a cynical Twitter troll. Then came the onslaught of disappointed families who decided to skip it altogether, citing the absence of whimsical fun in favor of moralizing cynicism, which, let's be honest, is never a crowd pleaser. Disney shot itself in the foot by believing modernizing means draining every ounce of charm in exchange for hollow lectures on empowerment.
This movie's cost them $200 million and counting. And instead of America being excited to take their families, I've got kids, we'd normally be excited to go see the remake of Bashful, Doc, Dopey, Grumpy, Happy, Sleepy, and Sneezy. Disney is looking at another woke flop with magical creatures instead of dwarves in a movie about 7 dwarfs.
I say, if I'm going to stand there 18 hours in a dress of an iconic Disney princess, I deserve to be paid for every hour that it is streamed on.
Sweetie, you're being paid $25 million and you're on TV saying your bosses suck. So Rachel Zegler, maybe keep your mouth shut.
Because nothing screams empowerment like a $300 million production that does away with love stories and dwarves to avoid stepping on any hypothetical toes. Are we really that surprised it all backfired? And it's not like Disney had no warning. The fiasco surrounding The Little Mermaid remake was a precursor, as was the abysmal box office performance of Lightyear, not to mention the existential meltdown at Lucasfilm, culminating in Kathleen Kennedy's rumored exit by 2025. It's a pattern. Disney invests a fortune in these beloved IPs, devotes a chunk of the script to modern ideology, and then looks shocked when half the fans revolt.
Disney, despite losing over $1 billion on their last 4 movies, as they continue to shove woke politics into people's faces who just want to go to the movie, laugh, cry, and go home. Look, people don't want to be lectured when they're watching a movie, and they certainly don't want to be told that they're bad people. But that's what Disney continues to do.
And, you know the saying, go woke, get broke, and Disney's going to lose money on this movie. And I believe it only made less than $1 million in China.
If Disney wants to make more woke films that tank at the box office, they are more than welcome to do that, but maybe think of an original idea.
Of course, the publicity meltdown alone would be prime comedic gold if it weren't so tragic. One can only imagine the corporate handlers telling Zegler, "You're absolutely fabulous. Keep telling the world how weird the original story is." And so she does.
Weird.
Apparently oblivious to the notion that insulting the property you're supposed to promote might be a terrible idea. The result? Snow White soared to an almighty 1.9 rating on IMDb, making it practically unwatchable in the eyes of many. Then there's the comedic subplot featuring the digitally inserted dwarves, which has overshadowed the actual storyline. Fans of the original who were expecting 7 distinct, lovable characters got a random gaggle of vaguely medieval sidekicks who look like the B team for a theme park stage show.
The fact that this film is completely falling apart, we're going to take a look at how bad this movie is actually doing in the box office, because it is hilariously bad. It is a complete and total humiliation for Disney. And like I said, they deserve it all, okay?
Initially, they were just a hodgepodge of actors. Some tall, some short, some who evidently had no idea what they'd be credited as. And even that plan was scrapped in reshoots. Now we have a mashup of CGI illusions that cost a boatload of money, all because Disney was terrified of getting canceled for referencing the word dwarf, even though the entire story is literally named for them. Imagine spending half your budget on special effects to create the very comedic confusion you were trying to avoid.
Now, one thing that is already universally known at this point by the general public is the fact that Disney is in full-on damage control mode.
But these guys at Disney, they're not that bright, they're not that smart, and we see that because they can't come up with any new IP. Why not write some new movies? You guys sit around, you have billions of dollars, they keep going back and rewriting the classic.
Meanwhile, the press turned into a field day of speculation. Will the prince cameo be cut entirely? Will Snow White wind up alone, happy, and brandishing a sword in the final act? As if the dwarves never existed and the concept of love is for simpletons? Every new quote from the cast fueled the swirling rumors that the script basically morphs into a commentary on how strong, independent women don't need pesky dwarves or princes. They just need a soapbox to condemn the patriarchy for a good 2 hours.
So Rachel Zegler has now decided to turn off replies on Instagram following major backlash over the Snow White movie, because she is getting completely roasted in all of her comments on Instagram. Everyone is roasting her. Everyone is calling her out for her being one of the key players for why this movie is failing as badly as it is.
Then there's the not so little matter of Disney's precarious financial position. Bob Iger returned as CEO to save the kingdom after Bob Chapek's short reign. Yet under Iger, the brand seems to have embarked on a scorched earth campaign against its own fans. Sure, the theme parks still rake in boatloads of cash, but the creative side is hemorrhaging credibility. Once an unstoppable juggernaut, Disney is now reaping the backlash from forcing heavy-handed messaging into stories that simply weren't built for that.
She's also just a spoiled, entitled, narcissistic brat who was perfectly willing, because she's not well, she might be stupid, but she's not so dumb that she didn't realize that by, for example, coming out and saying that all Trump supporters deserve to suffer for like, she's smart enough to know that, of course, that's going to upset a large portion of the potential audience for this project that I'm on.
And the shareholders aren't pleased. The stock languishes around the same price it was years ago, making even the money-losing streaming wars look like a lesser evil. If you think about it, Snow White exemplifies everything broken in Hollywood right now. The need to fix what isn't broken, the arrogance of young actors thinking they've solved centuries of societal woes by flipping fairy tale scripts, the corporate mania for diversity that results in ironically fewer roles for actual minorities, and the complete inability to read the room when it comes to longtime Disney fans. And just when you thought it couldn't get more surreal, there's the beef between Zegler and Godot that has apparently scuttled any normal co-promotional circuit. So much for the evil queen merely feuding with Snow White on screen. Now they can't seem to share a spotlight for more than a few minutes without lethal levels of awkwardness. For some, it's a juicy rumor that underscores how forced this entire project has become. For others, it's a sign that if you dump $500 million into a production, maybe you should ensure your leading ladies can at least pretend to like each other on camera. Yet ironically, it's that very train wreck factor that keeps us entertained, because Hollywood's absurdity is as mesmerizing as a slow-motion car crash. One day, you see a star belting out anthems on a red carpet. The next day, she's calling the 1937 cartoon offensive to modern audiences. And in the midst of this swirling chaos, you can practically hear the last shreds of Walt Disney's legacy weeping in the background. But let's not forget the PR spin from those famed entertainment media monopolies. They'll lay the blame on franchise fatigue, or claim a new generation simply can't relate to a story about a sweet princess who's saved by love. Then they'll conveniently ignore how countless other remakes thrived with significantly lower budgets and half the controversy. Because nothing says accountability like rewriting history to shield Hollywood from looking in the mirror. In the end, though, you almost have to applaud Disney for the comedic fiasco it gifted us. Snow White and the 7 ticket sales is an instant legend in the annals of misguided, mega-budget flops. Shareholders can gnash their teeth all they want, but maybe they'll finally realize that lecturing the audience, revamping the dwarves, and letting the star mock the original beloved storyline probably wasn't a golden path to success. And yes, you might have expected the evil queen to be the root of all trouble, but in this twisted revision, it's the star who ended up turning legions of fans against the film before it even premiered. So, if you're craving a cautionary tale about what happens when $500 million meets unchecked arrogance, look no further than Disney's ill-conceived gamble. Snow White was once the iconic start of an empire, but in modern Hollywood fashion, it's now a cringe-filled saga that thinks it's enlightening the masses while driving them away in droves. Because in the real ending of this story, we don't need a prince to save Snow White. We need someone to save Disney from its own misguided attempts at progress. And until that miracle arrives, we'll keep laughing at a kingdom that apparently forgot what made it magical in the first place, shaking our heads at the entertainment behemoth that, once upon a time, understood that heart and wonder matter more than half-baked wokeness and hollow spectacle. In the end, Hollywood will probably keep doing what it does best, acting like its scandals are surprising, while the rest of us munch popcorn, watch the meltdown from a safe distance, and remember a time when fairy tales were just simple, sweet dreams, instead of $500 million fiascos that make us yearn for talking woodland creatures and happily ever afters.